I agreed to work for the coldest millionaire in the world. Then I found out his deepest secret. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The coffee was still warm when her world collapsed. Imani Carter stared at the email on her laptop screen, reading the same 4 words over and over. Your position is eliminated. 26 months of 60-hour weeks, missed dinners and weekend calls, all reduced to a corporate template with her name spelled wrong. She closed the laptop with a soft click and leaned back in her cramped studio apartment chair. Outside her window, Chicago's November rain painted grey streaks down the glass, matching the hollowness spreading in her chest. Her savings account balance flashed in her mind, $847. Rent was due in 12 days. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Imani Carter? Speaking. This is Bethany from Vaughn Architectural Solutions. We got your resume from a temp agency. We need someone immediately, like today, immediately. Our executive assistant had a family emergency and won't be back for 6 weeks. Imani straightened. She'd never heard of Vaughn Architectural, but emergency work paid double rates. What kind of executive assistance? High level. The principal is particular, very particular. But if you can handle difficult personalities and maintain absolute discretion, the pay is excellent. How excellent? $4,000 a week. Imani's breath caught. That was more than she'd made in a month at her previous job. I can be there in an hour. Perfect. 40th floor Millennium Tower. Ask for Mr. Vaughn's private elevator. And Miss Carter? Bethany's voice lowered. He doesn't like small talk. At all. The Millennium Tower stretched into Chicago's grey sky like a steel monument to ambition. Imani's heels clicked against the marble lobby floor as she approached the security desk, her best blazer pressed and her portfolio clutched tightly. Imani Carter for Mr. Vaughn, she told the guard. He studied her ID for a long moment, then handed her a special key card. 40th floor, private elevator bank, left corridor. He's expecting you. The elevator was different from the others, sleek, silent, and requiring the key card to even call it. As it climbed, Imani caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. 30 years old, 5'7", with natural hair pulled back in a professional bun, and eyes that had seen enough disappointment to recognize opportunity when it knocked. The doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked more like a museum than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, while minimalist furniture sat precisely arranged on polished concrete floors. Everything was gray, white, or black. No color anywhere. Miss Carter. A woman emerged from behind a massive desk. Bethany appeared to be in her 50s, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed apologetic. Thank you for coming so quickly. Before I introduce you to Mr. Vaughn, I need to explain a few things. She gestured to a leather chair. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but he's also complex. He communicates primarily through written notes or brief verbal instructions. He doesn't engage in casual conversation, ever. Okay. He works unusual hours, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. He takes exactly 30 minutes for lunch, always alone, and he has one rule that's non-negotiable. When his office door is closed, no one, and I mean no one, enters without permission. Imani nodded. Understood. He's not cruel, Bethany continued. Just removed, very removed. Some people find it unsettling. I'm not easily unsettled. Bethany smiled for the first time. Good, because here he comes. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, measured, precise, deliberate. Imani turned toward the sound and felt her breath catch. Elias Vaughn was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray and perfectly tailored, but there was something in his posture that suggested he wore it like armor. His face was sharp angles and shadows, with eyes the color of storm clouds, but it was his expression that stopped her cold. Complete emptiness. Not anger, not arrogance, just nothing, like looking at a beautiful statue that had forgotten how to be human. He stopped 3 feet away from her, close enough to be polite, but far enough to maintain distance. His eyes met hers for exactly 1 second, before shifting to Bethany. This is Miss Carter, Bethany said. She'll be covering for me while I'm away. Elias studied Imani with the same intensity someone might use to evaluate a piece of furniture. No handshake, no welcome, just assessment. Finally he spoke. His voice was low, controlled, and completely devoid of warmth. Can you follow instructions without asking questions? Yes. Can you work in silence? Yes. Can you maintain confidentiality about everything you see, hear, or observe in this office? Absolutely. He nodded once. Your desk is there. He pointed to a smaller workstation near the windows. Your duties are outlined in the folder. I don't explain things twice. With that, he turned and walked toward a set of double doors at the far end of the space. The doors closed behind him with a soft click. Bethany handed Imani a thick folder. Welcome to Vaughn Architectural Solutions. Your first day starts now. As Imani settled at her new desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a temporary job. Through the glass walls, she could see Elias at his desk, head bent over architectural plans, completely absorbed in his work. She opened the folder and began reading, but her eyes kept drifting to the man behind the glass walls, the man who carried silence like a shield and wore isolation like a second skin. What she didn't know was that by the end of the day, she would discover something that would change everything she thought she knew about Elias Vaughn. What secrets do you think the coldest person you know is hiding, and would you be brave enough to find out? Some people spoke with words. Elias Vaughn spoke with absence. 3 days into her new position, Imani had learned to read the language of silence. The way Elias tapped his pen twice meant he needed coffee, black, no sugar, in the specific ceramic mug that sat alone on his desk. When he stood and walked to the window, it meant he was thinking through a problem and didn't want to be disturbed. And when he placed a file on the corner of his desk without looking at her, it meant she had exactly 10 minutes to review it before he needed her input. She'd also learned that Elias Vaughn was nothing like the other executives she'd worked for. He didn't yell when frustrated. He didn't demand the impossible. He simply existed in his own carefully constructed world, expecting others to adapt to his rhythm rather than forcing them to change theirs. What unsettled her wasn't his coldness, it was his precision. Every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated. Even the way he arranged his pencils suggested someone who needed control over every detail of his environment. He's been like this since I started working here, whispered Delilah, the receptionist from the main floor who'd brought up some documents. She was a young woman with bright eyes and an obvious crush on the mysterious executive. Nobody's ever seen him eat lunch with anyone. He orders the same sandwich every day from Morton's Deli, turkey, no mayo, whole wheat, but he always throws away half. Imani glanced through the glass walls at Elias, who was reviewing blueprints with the intensity of someone solving a life-or-death puzzle. How long have you worked here? 8 months. And in all that time, I've never seen him smile. Not once. Delilah lowered her voice further. Bethany says he used to be different. Before. Before what? Nobody knows. But whatever happened, it changed everything. After Delilah left, Imani found herself studying Elias more carefully. There were details she'd missed before. The way he never answered his phone when it rang, always letting it go to voicemail first. How he positioned his chair so his back was never to the door. The fact that his office had no personal photographs, no awards, no evidence of a life beyond these walls. At 4:47 p.m., her computer chimed with a message from Elias. Need you to call Morrison Construction. Tell them the deadline for the Riverside project moves to January 15th. Imani looked up to find him watching her through the glass. When their eyes met, he immediately looked away, but not before she caught something in his expression, a flicker of something that might have been vulnerability. She made the call, then typed back, Morrison confirms January 15th. They're requesting a meeting next week to discuss material changes. His response came immediately. No meetings. Handle it through email. All communications through email. All communications. Imani leaned back in her chair. In 3 days, she'd watched Elias avoid 4 different meeting requests, refuse 2 conference calls, and decline a lunch invitation from what appeared to be a major client. For someone running a successful architectural firm, he seemed determined to avoid human contact at all costs. At 6:30 p.m., most of the building had emptied, but Elias remained at his desk. Imani gathered her things, then paused at his door. It was slightly ajar, unusual for him. Mr. Vaughn? She called softly. I'm leaving for the evening. Is there anything else you need? No response. She could see him hunched over his desk, but his posture was different, less controlled, more broken. Mr. Vaughn. This time he looked up, and Imani's breath caught. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, and filled with something she couldn't name. For a moment he looked like a man drowning in his own silence. I'm fine, he said, but his voice cracked slightly on the words. You can go. Imani hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave, to respect his privacy, to maintain the professional distance he so clearly needed. But something in his expression reminded her of herself 3 days ago, staring at that termination email, lost, isolated, and trying to hold together pieces of a life that no longer made sense. "There's a good Thai place down the street," she said quietly. "They deliver until 9. I could order something if you'd like." Elias stared at her for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" "Because you haven't eaten since this morning, and because sometimes the simplest kindness is just making sure someone doesn't go hungry." He continued to stare, as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. Finally, he shook his head. I don't do that anymore." "Do what?" "Accept help. Accept kindness. Accept—" He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "You should go home, Miss Carter. I'll see you tomorrow." Imani nodded, but she didn't move. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Vaughan?" His jaw tightened. "You can ask. When was the last time you had a conversation with someone? I mean a real conversation, not just work instructions." The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elias's hands stilled on his desk, and for a moment, Imani thought he might actually answer. Instead, he stood up abruptly. "Good night, Miss Carter." "Good night, Mr. Vaughan." As she walked to the elevator, Imani could feel him watching her. When she turned back, he was still standing in his doorway, silhouetted against the light from his office. There was something lonely about the image, a man trapped in his own carefully constructed prison. The elevator doors closed, but Imani couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just witnessed something important. Not just loneliness, but a kind of self-imposed exile, as if Elias Vaughan had made a decision to cut himself off from the world and was now trapped by his own success at achieving it. Her phone buzzed as she reached the lobby. A text from an unknown number. "The Thai place on Webster has good pad Thai, if you were wondering." Imani smiled despite herself. It was the first personal thing Elias had shared with her, a tiny crack in his armor that suggested maybe, just maybe, the man behind the silence wasn't as unreachable as he pretended to be. But what she didn't know was that tomorrow she would discover exactly why Elias Vaughan had built such perfect walls around himself, and why he was so terrified of letting anyone inside. Everyone had secrets, but Elias Vaughan collected them like armor. By her second week, Imani had established a rhythm with her enigmatic boss. She arrived at 8:30 a.m. with his black coffee and the daily project reports. He would nod once, his version of thank you, and disappear into his office until lunch. At exactly 12:15 p.m., he'd emerge to collect the turkey sandwich she'd ordered from Morton's Deli, eat half at his desk while reviewing blueprints, then throw the rest away. It was wasteful and puzzling, but Imani had learned not to question Elias's habits. Each one seemed to serve some purpose in the carefully structured world he'd built around himself. What she couldn't figure out was Friday afternoons. "He's leaving," whispered Delilah, who had started making excuses to deliver documents personally, just to catch glimpses of the mysterious executive. "It's 3:58 p.m. He always leaves at exactly 4:09 p.m. on Fridays." Imani looked up from her computer to see Elias emerging from his office, briefcase in hand. He wore the same charcoal suit as always, but there was something different about his posture, less rigid, more human. "Miss Carter," he said, stopping at her desk, "I'll be unavailable until Monday morning. If Morrison Construction calls about the Riverside project, tell them I'll review their proposals next week." "Of course. May I ask—" "No." His response was immediate, but not harsh. "You may not." He walked toward the elevator, then paused. Without turning around, he said, "The cleaning crew comes at 6. Make sure they don't enter my office. Ever." The elevator doors closed, leaving Imani alone with her questions and the scent of his cologne, something subtle and expensive that seemed to linger in the air like a ghost. "Where do you think he goes?" Delilah asked, settling into the chair beside Imani's desk. "I have no idea, but it's important to him. You can tell by the way he moves like he's going somewhere that matters. Maybe he has a secret girlfriend." Imani shook her head. "A man with a secret girlfriend doesn't look that lonely." "Then what?" "I don't know, but I'm starting to think that's the point." The following Tuesday, Imani discovered something that made her reconsider everything she thought she knew about Elias Vaughan. She was organizing his calendar when she noticed a pattern in his appointments. Every meeting was scheduled for Tuesday through Thursday. Mondays were left completely open, as if he needed time to transition back into his work persona. And Fridays after 4 p.m. were blocked off permanently. No exceptions, no explanations. But it was the small notation in the corner of his desk calendar that caught her attention. L&A, 4 years, 2 months, 15 days. The handwriting was Elias's, careful and precise. But beneath the numbers in fainter ink were 2 other words. Never forget. Imani stared at the notation for a long moment. 4 years, 2 months, 15 days from what? And who were L&A? Her computer chimed with a message from Elias. Need you to cancel the Henderson meeting. Reschedule for next Tuesday. She looked up to find him watching her through the glass walls. There was something different about his expression, more guarded than usual, as if he suspected she'd seen something she shouldn't have. Henderson meeting moved to Tuesday, 2 p.m. Confirmed. Thank you. But as she typed, Imani couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled onto something significant. The notation wasn't random. It was a countdown. But to what? That afternoon, she found herself studying Elias more carefully, the way he held his pen, the precise arrangement of his desk, the fact that he kept his coffee mug in the exact same position every day. It all suggested someone who needed control, who couldn't afford to let anything be random or spontaneous. It was the behavior of someone who'd been broken by chaos and was now trying to prevent it from happening again. At 3:45 p.m., Imani made a decision that would change everything. "Mr. Vaughan," she called through his slightly open door. "I'm leaving a few minutes early today, doctor's appointment." It was a lie, but she needed to know where he went every Friday. Call it curiosity or call it concern. Either way, she had to understand what pulled him away from his carefully controlled world every week. "Of course," he replied without looking up. Imani gathered her things and headed for the elevator. But instead of going down to the lobby, she pressed the button for the parking garage. If Elias was leaving at 4 p.m., she had 15 minutes to position herself where she could see him without being seen. The garage was dimly lit and filled with the expensive cars of the building's tenants. She found a spot behind a concrete pillar with a clear view of the elevator bank and waited. At exactly 4:02 p.m., the elevator doors opened and Elias emerged. But this wasn't the composed, controlled man she'd been working with for 2 weeks. His shoulders were slumped, his stride slower, and there was something in his expression that looked almost like grief. He walked to a black BMW parked in a reserved spot near the elevator. For a moment, he just stood there, keys in hand, staring at the car as if it held some terrible significance. Then he got in and drove away. Imani waited until his taillights disappeared before emerging from her hiding spot. She'd expected to feel satisfied, like she'd solved a puzzle. Instead, she felt hollow. Whatever Elias was doing on Friday afternoons, it wasn't bringing him joy. It was bringing him pain. The next morning, she arrived at the office to find a single white envelope on her desk. Her name was written on the front in Elias's careful handwriting. Inside was a short note. "I know you followed me yesterday. We need to talk." Imani's heart hammered as she looked up at his office. Elias was already at his desk, but this time he was watching her. When their eyes met, he gestured for her to come in. She knocked on his doorframe. "You wanted to see me? Sit down, Miss Carter." She took the chair across from his desk, trying to read his expression. He didn't look angry, just tired, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy weight for too long. "I should fire you," he said quietly. "Yes, you should. But I'm not going to." "Why not?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "Because in 2 weeks, you're the first person who's cared enough to wonder where I go, and I'm not sure if that makes you dangerous or exactly what I need." Little did Imani know that by the end of the week, she would discover the truth about Elias's Friday disappearances and learn that some secrets are kept not to protect others, but to protect the person carrying them. Some conversations change everything. This was one of them. Elias stood up from his desk and walked to the window, his back to Imani. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the distant hum of Chicago traffic 40 floors below. 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago, he said finally. His voice so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "That's when my life ended." Imani remained silent, sensing that any interruption would cause him to retreat back into his shell. "You want to know where I go on Fridays?" He turned to face her, and she was startled by the raw pain in his eyes. "I go to visit the graves of my wife and daughter." The words hit Imani like a physical blow. She'd suspected tragedy, but hearing it confirmed made everything about Elias suddenly make sense. The isolation, the control, the careful distance he maintained from everyone around him. "Their names were Luna and Aria," he continued, moving back to his desk but remaining standing. Luna was 32, Aria had just turned 6. They were driving to Aria's piano recital when a drunk driver ran a red light. Imani's throat tightened. "Elias, I'm so sorry." "Don't." His voice was sharp but not angry. Please don't say you're sorry. Everyone says they're sorry and it doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring them back. He sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 38 years. The driver was texting. 17 years old, texting about some party he was going to that weekend. He walked away with a broken arm. My wife and daughter died instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. Imani wanted to say something, anything, but every word that came to mind felt inadequate. You asked me when I last had a real conversation with someone, Elias said, his fingers absently straightening the papers on his desk. It was with Luna, the morning they died. She was excited about Arya's recital. Arya had been practicing für Elise for months, and Luna couldn't wait to record it. What happened to the driver? 6 months in juvenile detention. Community service. His record was sealed because he was a minor. Elias's laugh was bitter. Justice. Imani felt a surge of anger on his behalf, but she kept it to herself. This wasn't about her feelings. It was about understanding the man who had been carrying this weight alone for 4 years. Is that why you don't drive? She asked gently. He looked surprised. How did you take a car service to work? I've seen the receipts. And yesterday, when you went to the parking garage, you stood by your car for a long time before getting in. Elias nodded slowly. I bought that BMW 3 months before they died. Luna loved it. She said it made her feel safe. His voice cracked slightly. I haven't driven it more than a handful of times since the funeral, but I can't sell it either, because it still smells like her perfume. He stared at her, shocked by her understanding. How could you possibly know that? Because grief isn't logical. It's all the little things that keep them close. For the first time since she'd known him, Elias's carefully constructed mask slipped completely. His shoulders sagged, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Every Friday I bring Luna white roses, her favorites, and I tell Arya about my week. I describe the buildings I'm designing, the clients I'm working with, anything to feel like I'm still part of their lives somehow. He looked up at Imani. It's pathetic, isn't it? No, she said firmly. It's love. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but a loosening of the tension he'd been carrying. Everyone else thinks I should move on, get back out there, start dating again, as if love is interchangeable, like changing clothes. You don't have to move on from them to move forward with your life. I tried, you know. About a year ago, my business partner set me up with someone. A nice woman, successful, attractive. We went to dinner, and she spent the entire evening telling me about her ex-husband's shortcomings. Elias shook his head. All I could think about was Luna, and how she never spoke badly about anyone, even people who hurt her. What happened? I excused myself to the bathroom and never came back. I left cash on the table for the bill and walked home in the rain. He met her eyes. That's when I decided it was easier to just stop trying, stop pretending I could be the person I was before. Imani leaned forward in her chair. Can I tell you something? He nodded. My father died when I was 16. Heart attack, completely unexpected. For 2 years, my mother wouldn't change anything in their bedroom. His clothes stayed in the closet. His coffee mug stayed on the nightstand. His side of the bed stayed made. She paused. Then one day, she met Mrs. Henderson from down the street in the grocery store. Mrs. Henderson had lost her husband the year before, and she told my mother something I'll never forget. What? She said, honey, there's a difference between honoring someone's memory and being buried with them. Your husband would want you to live, not just survive. Elias was quiet for a long moment. What did your mother do? She started small, moved his mug to the kitchen cabinet, donated some of his clothes to charity, started sleeping on his side of the bed sometimes. Imani smiled softly. She never remarried, but she started living again. She'd tell me, your father will always be my first love, but that doesn't mean my heart can't grow bigger. Second, you think I should follow her example? I think you should stop punishing yourself for surviving. The words hung in the air between them, like a challenge. Elias stared at her for a long moment, and Imani could see him wrestling with something internal, years of carefully constructed walls being tested by a truth he wasn't ready to accept. Finally, he stood up. I should get back to work. It was a dismissal, but a gentle one. Imani rose from her chair, but paused at the door. Elias? He looked up. Thank you for trusting me with their names. After she left, Elias sat alone in his office, staring at the calendar notation that had become his daily ritual. For the first time in 4 years, he wondered what Luna would think of the life he'd built, or rather the life he'd stopped building. But Imani's words had planted a seed that would soon grow into something neither of them expected, the possibility that healing didn't require forgetting, and that love could expand, rather than replace. Healing begins with the smallest shifts. A coffee shared, a door left open, a moment of unguarded laughter. The change in Elias was subtle at first, so subtle that Imani almost missed it. On Monday morning, he emerged from his office at 10:30 a.m. instead of staying locked away until lunch. He walked to her desk with a blueprint in hand, but instead of leaving it with a brief instruction, he paused. "The Morrison Project," he said, unrolling the architectural plans across her workspace. "They want to add a children's playground to the community center design." Imani studied the blueprint, noting the precise lines and thoughtful spacing. "That's a beautiful addition. Will it fit within their budget? Probably not. But," he hesitated, running his finger along the edge of the paper, "children need places to play, places where they feel safe." There was something in his voice, a softness that hadn't been there before. Imani looked up to find him staring at the playground design with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Luna and I used to take Arya to a playground like this one," he said quietly. "She loved the swings, said they made her feel like she was flying." It was the first time he'd mentioned his family without prompting, the first time he'd shared a memory that wasn't buried in pain. What was her favorite thing to do there? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She'd make up stories about the other children, create entire backstories for kids she'd never even spoken to. "That girl in the red jacket is a secret princess," she'd whisper, "and the boy on the monkey bars is training to be a superhero. She sounds like she had an amazing imagination." She did. Luna used to say Arya saw magic everywhere because she hadn't learned yet that the world could be cruel. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like a breakthrough. When Elias returned to his office, he left the door slightly ajar, something he'd never done before. By Wednesday, the changes were more noticeable. Elias started eating his entire sandwich at lunch, instead of throwing half away. He responded to emails with more than single-word answers, and when Delilah delivered documents that afternoon, he actually acknowledged her presence with a nod. "Did you see that?" Delilah whispered excitedly after he'd returned to his office. "He looked directly at me, and I swear he almost smiled." "Almost smiled isn't the same as smiling," Imani pointed out, but she was secretly pleased by his progress. For Elias Vaughn, almost smiling is like anyone else throwing a parade. That afternoon, Imani was reviewing contract details when she heard something unexpected. Laughter. Not loud, not long, but unmistakably genuine. She looked up to see Elias on a phone call, and for just a moment, his face looked younger, lighter. When he hung up, she couldn't resist asking, "Good news. The Henderson project just got approved for Phase 2. Apparently, the City Council loved our community integration design." He paused, then added, "It's the first project I've felt genuinely excited about in years." "That's wonderful. You should celebrate." "I don't really celebrate anymore." "Why not?" He considered the question seriously. "Because celebration feels like betrayal, like I'm moving on without them." Imani set down her pen and gave him her full attention. "Can I ask you something? You seem to make a habit of it. When Arya accomplished something, learned a new piano piece, got a good grade, made a friend, how did you and Luna respond?" "We celebrated. Luna would make her favorite chocolate chip pancakes and I'd—" He stopped, understanding where she was going with this. "You'd what?" "I'd pick her up and spin her around until she got dizzy and begged me to stop." His voice was soft with memory. "She'd giggle so hard she'd get hiccups." "And how do you think Arya would feel if she knew you'd stopped celebrating good things because she wasn't here to celebrate them with you?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. "She'd probably tell me I was being silly. She hated when people were sad." "Then maybe celebrating isn't betraying their memory. Maybe it's honoring who they were." Thursday brought the biggest surprise yet. At 3 p.m., Elias emerged from his office, carrying 2 coffee cups. "I made too much coffee," he said, setting one cup on Imani's desk. Seemed wasteful to throw it away. Imani looked at the cup, then at him. They both knew he hadn't made too much coffee. The machine in his office only made single servings. This was intentional. "Thank you." He lingered beside her desk, seeming unsure of himself. "The coffee might be terrible. I'm not used to making it for other people." Imani took a sip. It was perfect. Strong, but not bitter, with just the right temperature. "It's excellent. Luna always said I made better coffee than the expensive shops. She'd bring me a thermos of it when she picked me up late from the office." He sat down in the chair across from her desk. Another first. "I haven't made coffee for anyone else since her. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, watching the Chicago skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time since Imani had started working there, The office felt less like a mausoleum and more like a place where people actually worked together. "Can I tell you something?" Elias said suddenly. "Of course. I've been thinking about what you said, about your mother and how she started sleeping on your father's side of the bed. And last night I drove home instead of taking a car service. It was the first time I'd driven anywhere except to the cemetery since the accident." Imani felt her heart skip. How did it feel? Terrifying, but also, he searched for the right word, liberating, like I was reclaiming something I'd given up. "That's huge, Elias. It's just driving." "No, it's not. It's choosing to engage with the world again instead of just surviving in it." He smiled then. Not a full smile, but something genuine and warm that transformed his entire face. "You know, Luna would have liked you." "Yeah?" She had a theory that the best people were the ones who saw through your defenses and cared enough to call you on your nonsense. Is that what I'm doing? Calling you on your nonsense? Absolutely. And it's exactly what I needed, even though I didn't want to admit it. As Elias returned to his office that afternoon, Imani felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Not just for her job security or financial stability, but for the complicated, wounded, brilliant man who was slowly learning to live again. But what neither of them realized was that these small changes were building towards something much larger, a moment that would test everything Elias thought he knew about love, loss, and the possibility of second chances. What small change in your daily routine do you think could make the biggest difference in how you connect with others? And do you believe healing happens in big moments or tiny steps? Sometimes the most profound moments happen in the most ordinary circumstances. Friday arrived with an unexpected complication. At 2 p.m., Imani's phone rang with news that would change everything. "Miss Carter, this is Dr. Brennan from Chicago General. Your emergency contact form lists you for Mrs. Dolores Kingsley." Imani's heart stopped. Mrs. Kingsley was her elderly neighbor, a 78-year-old widow who had become like a grandmother to her. "What happened?" "She's had a fall. Nothing life-threatening, but she needs surgery on her hip. She's asking for you." "I'll be right there." Imani hung up and immediately started gathering her things, her mind racing through everything she needed to handle. Mrs. Kingsley had no family nearby, and Imani was the closest thing to a daughter she had. She was halfway to the elevator when she realized she'd forgotten to tell Elias she was leaving. She turned back to find him standing in his office doorway, watching her with concern. "Emergency?" he asked. "My neighbor. She fell and needs surgery. I have to go." His response was immediate. "Don't worry about work. But it's Friday afternoon, and you have the Henderson call at 4, and Imani." The use of her first name stopped her mid-sentence. "Some things are more important than work. Go take care of your family." She stared at him, surprised by his understanding. "Thank you. Keep me updated." It was phrased as a question, not a command, and something about his tone made her realize he genuinely cared about what happened to Mrs. Kingsley, a woman he'd never even met. "I will." At the hospital, Imani spent the next 6 hours in waiting rooms, filling out paperwork and holding Mrs. Kingsley's hand through the pre-surgical anxiety. The surgery went well, but Mrs. Kingsley would need weeks of recovery and physical therapy. "You don't have to stay, dear," Mrs. Kingsley said weakly from her hospital bed. "I know you have that important job. Nothing is more important than making sure you're okay. You're such a good girl, just like I told that handsome man who came by." Imani looked up from the crossword puzzle she'd been helping with. "What handsome man?" "The one from your office. Tall, serious-looking, expensive suit. He brought flowers." Imani's heart skipped. "Someone from my office came here. Said his name was Elias. Very polite, but he seemed nervous. Asked if there was anything you needed. He's here. Now? In the waiting room, I think. Been there about an hour." Imani found Elias exactly where Mrs. Kingsley had said, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair, looking completely out of place among the hospital's sterile environment. He was staring at his hands, lost in thought, when she approached. "What are you doing here?" He looked up, startled. "I wanted to make sure everything was okay, and I thought—" He gestured to a small bouquet of white roses on the chair beside him. "I thought she might like flowers." White roses. Luna's favorites. The significance wasn't lost on Imani. "Elias, you didn't have to come all the way here." "Yes, I did." He stood up, running a hand through his hair. "When you left today, you looked scared, really scared, and I realized that in the past month you've been taking care of me, making sure I eat, checking if I need anything, just being present. But I've never asked if you needed anything. That's your job description." "No, that's friendship. And I haven't been a very good friend. The word friendship hung between them, acknowledging something that had been growing but hadn't been named. Imani felt a warmth spread through her chest. "How is she?" Elias asked. "Surgery went well. She'll be in the hospital for a few days, then needs rehabilitation." Imani sank into the chair beside him. "She doesn't have anyone else. Her husband died 5 years ago, and her children live across the country. What will you do? Take care of her, help with her recovery, make sure she has what she needs." Elias was quiet for a moment. "You can't do that and work full-time." "I know, I'll figure something out." "No, you won't, because I'm going to help." Imani turned to stare at him. "What?" "Mrs. Kingsley needs care. You need to be able to provide that care without worrying about your job, so we'll make it work." "Elias, you can't just rearrange your entire business because my neighbor needs help. Watch me." His voice was firm, but his eyes were gentle. "You told me that celebration honors the people we love. Well, this is how I want to honor Luna and Arya, by making sure someone who matters to you gets the care she needs." Imani felt tears prick her eyes. "Why would you do that?" He was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Because a month ago, I was drowning in my own grief, and you threw me a lifeline without even knowing it. Because you see people, really see them, and you care enough to help. And because what? Because Luna always said that the measure of a person isn't what they accomplish when everything is going well. It's what they do when someone they care about is in trouble." The simple honesty of his statement took Imani's breath away. "You barely know me. That's not true anymore." He picked up the white roses. "Should we give these to Mrs. Kingsley?" They spent the next hour in Mrs. Kingsley's room, with Elias listening patiently as the elderly woman told stories about her late husband and asked pointed questions about his intentions toward Imani. To Imani's surprise, he answered every question with humor and grace, even laughing when Mrs. Kingsley declared that he had kind eyes but sad shoulders. As they walked to the parking garage together, Imani felt something shifting between them, a deepening of trust that went beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. "Thank you," she said as they reached his car, "for coming, for the flowers, for understanding. Thank you for showing me that caring about someone doesn't have to hurt." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 4 years of carefully guarded emotion. As Elias drove away, Imani stood in the parking garage and realized that somewhere between coffee and white roses, between shared grief and mutual understanding, she had started falling for the man behind the walls. What she didn't know was that Elias was having the same realization, and it terrified him more than anything had in 4 years. The moment when friendship becomes something more is rarely announced. It arrives quietly, in a glance that lingers too long or a touch that means everything. The following Monday transformed their carefully maintained professional dynamic into something neither of them had prepared for. Elias arrived at the office with coffee for both of them and a flexible schedule that allowed Imani to visit Mrs. Kingsley during lunch and leave early for physical therapy appointments. But it was the small intimacies that caught them both off guard. The way he touched her shoulder gently when delivering the coffee, how she straightened his tie without thinking when he emerged from a video conference looking disheveled. "You don't have to keep doing this," Imani said as he handed her a steaming cup at 10 a.m. "Doing what?" "Taking care of me the way I took care of you." Elias paused, his fingers still wrapped around his own mug. "What if I want to?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address directly. "Why?" she asked softly. "Because for the first time in 4 years, taking care of someone doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like," he searched for the right word, "like coming back to life." Wednesday brought an unexpected crisis that would test the boundaries they'd been carefully maintaining. At 2 p.m., Imani's phone rang with devastating news. Mrs. Kingsley had suffered complications during physical therapy, not life-threatening, but requiring immediate surgery and an extended hospital stay. Imani hung up the phone and immediately burst into tears. The stress of the past week, combined with worry about the woman who'd become her surrogate grandmother, finally overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. She was still crying when Elias emerged from his office, drawn by the sound of her distress. What happened? Through her tears, she explained about Mrs. Kingsley's setback, her fear about the surgery, and her guilt about not being there when it happened. Without hesitation, Elias walked around her desk and did something that surprised them both. He pulled her into his arms. The hug was meant to be comforting, brotherly, but the moment Imani melted against his chest, everything changed. She fit perfectly against him, her head tucked beneath his chin, and for the first time in years, Elias felt the rightness of holding someone who mattered. "She's going to be okay," he murmured into her hair, "and you're going to be okay too." Imani pulled back slightly to look at him, her tears still fresh on her cheeks. "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're stronger than you know, and because you're not handling this alone anymore." The space between them was maybe 6 inches, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, close enough to notice that his breathing had changed. The air felt charged, electric with possibility. "Elias," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know this complicates everything." "What does?" Instead of answering with words, he reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was tender, intimate, and completely devastating to both of them. "The way you make me want things I thought I'd never want again," he said finally. Before either of them could think too hard about the consequences, Imani rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was supposed to be soft, grateful, a moment of connection born from shared vulnerability. But the instant their lips met, 4 years of Elias's carefully contained loneliness and weeks of growing attraction exploded into something neither of them could control. He kissed her back with a hunger that surprised them both, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer as if she might disappear if he didn't hold tight enough. She tasted like coffee and possibility, like everything he'd thought he'd lost forever. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, staring at each other with a mixture of wonder and terror. "Oh God," Imani whispered. "What did we just do?" Elias stepped back, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know. I know what we did, but I don't know what it means, or what we're supposed to do now, or, Elias, or if this is betraying Luna's memory, or if I'm using you to feel something other than grief, or, Elias." He stopped rambling and looked at her. "Do you regret it?" The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. He studied her face, flushed, beautiful, worried, and realized that for the first time in 4 years, he felt truly alive. "No," he said quietly, "I don't regret it, but I'm terrified of what it means. Because of Luna, because of you." His honesty was brutal and beautiful. "Because if I let myself care about you the way I'm starting to, and something happens to you, I won't survive it twice." Imani felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. "So what do we do?" "I don't know. I've been emotionally dead for 4 years. I'm not exactly an expert on how to navigate this." Before she could respond, the elevator chimed, and Delilah's voice echoed across the office. "Hello, Imani. I have those contracts from Morrison Construction." They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents, both trying to look professional while their hearts hammered against their ribs. "1 second, Imani called, then turned to Elias. "We should talk about this." "Yes, definitely, but not here." "When? Tonight? After you visit Mrs. Kingsley?" She nodded, then smoothed her hair and went to meet Delilah, leaving Elias standing alone by her desk, touching his lips and wondering if he'd just made the best or worst decision of his life. What neither of them realized was that their kiss had been witnessed by someone who would soon force them to confront feelings they weren't ready to examine and make a choice that would change everything. Some secrets reveal themselves when we're finally ready to let them go. That evening, Imani left the hospital with Mrs. Kingsley's encouraging words ringing in her ears. "That young man of yours has the look of someone who's been carrying too much alone. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a person is help them set down their burdens." She returned to the office at 8 p.m. to find Elias waiting for her, 2 takeout containers from the Thai restaurant, and an expression that suggested he'd spent the past 6 hours overthinking everything. "How is she?" he asked as she settled into the chair across from his desk. "Better. The surgery went well, and she's already asking when she can go home to terrorize her physical therapist." Imani opened her container, the familiar scent of pad Thai filling the air between them. "She asked about you. What did you tell her?" "That you're complicated." Elias smiled, a real smile this time. "That's diplomatic." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both aware they were avoiding the conversation they'd come here to have. Finally, Elias set down his fork and looked directly at her. "I've been thinking about this afternoon. And I realized something. For 4 years I've been acting like loving Luna, and Arya was a finite resource, like if I let myself care about anyone else, I'd somehow diminish what I felt for them." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But when I held you today, when I kissed you, I didn't feel like I was betraying them. I felt like I was honoring the part of me they loved most." Imani's breath caught. "Which part?" The part that believes in connection, in taking care of people, in building something beautiful with someone who matters. Before she could respond, he stood up. "There's something I want to show you, something I've never shown anyone." He walked to what appeared to be a solid wall behind his desk and pressed something Imani couldn't see. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a doorway she'd never known existed. "Elias, what? Trust me?" She followed him through the doorway into a room that took her breath away. It was an artist's studio, lit by soft overhead lights that illuminated dozens of drawings covering every wall. But these weren't architectural blueprints. They were portraits, landscapes, moments captured in charcoal and pencil with breathtaking skill. "You're an artist," she whispered. "I used to be. Before architecture, before everything." He moved to the center of the room, surrounded by his work. "This was supposed to be a conference room, but I converted it after I couldn't bear the idea of meetings anymore." Imani moved closer to the walls, studying the drawings. Most were of Luna and Arya. Luna laughing, Arya at the piano. Quiet moments of domestic happiness rendered with love and devastating accuracy. But there were others too. Chicago skylines, strangers on the street, Mrs. Kingsley from the hospital. "Elias, these are incredible. They're all I have left of who I used to be." She turned to find him watching her with an expression of naked vulnerability. "Who you used to be. Someone who believed in beauty. Who saw the world as full of possibilities instead of dangers." He gestured to the drawings of his family. "Someone who could love without being afraid." Imani moved deeper into the room and stopped short. In the far corner, partially hidden by shadows, was an easel with a drawing she recognized immediately. Her own face captured in incredible detail. "When did you draw this?" Elias's cheeks flushed. "Last week, after the hospital. I couldn't stop thinking about the way you looked when you were worried about Mrs. Kingsley. Completely present, completely caring, completely yourself." She studied the drawing, seeing herself through his eyes. Stronger than she felt, more beautiful than she believed, full of a compassion that transformed her ordinary features into something luminous. "I haven't drawn anyone new in 4 years, he said quietly, "but I couldn't get your face out of my head." Imani turned to face him, her heart hammering. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating and true. Imani felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming rightness of finally hearing him say what they'd both been feeling. "It terrifies me too," she whispered. "Because of the job? Because I'm your boss? No, because I've been waiting my whole life for someone to see me the way you do in that drawing. And now that I've found it, I'm afraid of losing it." Elias closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. Instead, she met him halfway. "What if we don't lose it?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if we're both brave enough to try?" This time, when he kissed her, it was different, slower, deeper, full of promise instead of just desperate need. It was the kiss of two people who had decided to stop running from what scared them most. When they broke apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone without being afraid of losing them. Then we'll figure it out together." "What about work? What about—" "Elias." She placed her hands on either side of his face. "We'll figure it out. All of it. But right now, in this moment, can we just be happy?" He looked around the room at the drawings that represented his past, at the woman who might represent his future, at the art that had kept him connected to his humanity when everything else felt lost. "Yes," he said finally, "we can be happy." As they stood surrounded by years of carefully preserved memories and the promise of new ones yet to be made, neither of them noticed the shadow that had briefly appeared in the doorway, someone who had seen them together and was already planning how to use that information. But for now, in the sanctuary of hidden art and shared vulnerability, Elias and Imani allowed themselves to believe that love could be stronger than fear and that some risks were worth taking. Sometimes moving forward requires facing the very thing you've been running from. The happiness lasted exactly 3 days. Tuesday morning started like any other. Elias arrived with coffee for both of them, their fingers brushing as he handed her the cup, sending warmth shooting up her arm. They'd been careful at work, maintaining professionalism while stealing glances and small touches that felt like shared secrets. But at 10:47 a.m., everything changed. "Mr. Vaughan?" Delilah's voice came through the intercom, unusually tense. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." Elias frowned at Imani, who shrugged. His calendar was clear until noon. "Send them in." The woman who walked through the elevator doors was elegantly dressed, probably in her early 60s, with silver hair and eyes the same stormy grey as Elias's. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard, but there was something fragile around the edges of her composure. Elias went completely rigid. "Mom." Imani felt her stomach drop. In all their conversations, Elias had never mentioned his family. Now she understood why. "Hello, Elias." The woman's voice was carefully modulated, but Imani could hear years of unresolved tension beneath the surface. "You look well. What are you doing here? May I sit down?" Elias gestured to the chair across from his desk, his entire demeanor shifting back to the cold, controlled man Imani had first met. "How did you get past security?" "I told them I was your mother, which, despite your best efforts to pretend otherwise, I still am." The silence that followed was deafening. Imani started to rise from her desk to give them privacy, but Elias's mother turned to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Imani. I'm Vivian Vaughn. How do you," Imani began. "Know who you are?" Vivian's smile sharpened. "Because my son has been drawing pictures of you, and someone was kind enough to send me photographs." Elias shot to his feet. "Someone sent you what?" "Pictures of you kissing this young woman. Pictures of you in that room with all your art." She said the word like it tasted bitter. "Pictures that suggest you've been moving on quite nicely." Imani felt the blood drain from her face. Someone had been watching them, photographing them. The shadow in the doorway hadn't been her imagination. "Who sent them?" Elias's voice was deadly quiet. "Does it matter? What matters is that 4 years after my daughter-in-law and granddaughter died, you're finally ready to rejoin the living, and you didn't think to tell your family. We're not family anymore." The words hit Vivian like a physical blow. "Elias, we stopped being family the day you told me I needed to get over Luna and Arya, the day you said they were gone and I needed to focus on finding someone new. That was 3 months after the funeral. You weren't eating, you weren't sleeping, you'd locked yourself away from everyone who loved you. Because I was grieving, because you were dying." Vivian's composed facade cracked. "You were disappearing, piece by piece, and we were watching it happen. Your father and I were terrified we were going to lose you too." The raw pain in her voice stopped Elias's angry response before it could form. For a moment, mother and son stared at each other across 4 years of misunderstanding and hurt. "So you cut me off," he said finally. "You cut us off first. When you moved out of the house we shared, when you stopped returning calls, when you acted like we were the enemy instead of people who were grieving too." Imani watched this exchange with growing understanding. Elias hadn't just lost his wife and daughter, he'd lost his entire support system because grief had made communication impossible. "Luna and Arya were our family too," Vivian continued, her voice breaking. "We loved them. We miss them every single day. But we also love you, and watching you disappear into that pain was killing us. So you replaced me." "What? Don't lie to me. I know about Marcus and Bethany's adoption. I know you've been playing grandparents to their kids." The bitterness in Elias's voice was devastating. "I know you moved on just fine without me." Vivian stared at him in shock. "Is that what you think? That we replaced you? Didn't you?" "Oh, my darling boy." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "We were trying to figure out how to live with a hole in our family where you used to be. Those children aren't replacements. They're the only thing that's kept us from drowning in the grief of losing everyone we loved most." The words hung in the air like a confession. Imani felt tears prick her own eyes. Watching this family try to bridge a chasm that had been built from love and pain in equal measure. "I couldn't," Elias whispered. "I couldn't pretend to be okay when I wasn't. I couldn't sit through family dinners and act like the world made sense anymore. We weren't asking you to pretend. We were asking you to let us help you heal." "I didn't know how to heal, I still don't." Vivian looked at Imani, then back at her son. "But you're learning." It wasn't a question. She'd seen the change in him, even in this brief, painful conversation. The man arguing with her now was present, engaged, alive in a way he hadn't been in years. "Yes," Elias said quietly, "I'm learning." "Because of her?" Elias glanced at Imani, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Because of her. And because I finally understand that loving Luna and Arya doesn't mean I have to stop living." Vivienne followed his gaze to Imani. "May I ask how long this has been going on?" "It's complicated," Imani said softly. "Love always is." Vivienne stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Elias, I came here because I was worried about you. Because the pictures made it look like you were finally ready to be part of the world again. And I wanted to know if that meant you might be ready to be part of our family again too. I don't know. That's honest, at least." She picked up her purse. For what it's worth, your father and I never stopped hoping you'd come back to us, and we never stopped loving you, even when loving you hurt. She headed toward the elevator, then paused. Imani? Yes? Thank you for bringing my son back to life, but be careful. Someone is watching you both very closely, and they may not have your best interests at heart. After she left, Elias and Imani sat in stunned silence. Finally, Elias spoke. Someone's been photographing us. Who? I don't know. But whoever it is knows about the room, knows about us, and they're using it against me somehow. What do we do? Elias stood up, his jaw set with determination. We find out who's been watching us, and we make sure they understand that I'm not the broken man I used to be. But what they would discover about their mysterious observer would force them to confront not just external threats, but the question of whether their newfound love was strong enough to survive the price of being together. The truth has a way of demanding everything from us, our courage, our honesty, and sometimes our hearts. The answer came at 4:30 p.m. that same day, delivered with the calculated precision of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. Bethany walked through the elevator doors, carrying a manila envelope, and wearing an expression Imani had never seen before, cold, determined, and completely unlike the kind woman who had welcomed her on her first day. Bethany? Elias looked up from his desk, confusion written across his face. What are you doing here? Your mother's surgery was scheduled for next month. I lied. She set the envelope on his desk with deliberate care. Just like I've been lying about a lot of things. Imani felt ice form in her stomach. You've been watching us. Very good. Bethany's smile was sharp enough to cut. I've been documenting everything. The coffee dates, the intimate conversations, the way you look at each other, that rather passionate kiss in his office. She gestured to the envelope. It's all in there. Elias opened the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside were dozens of photographs, some taken with a telephoto lens from the building across the street, others clearly shot from inside the office itself. All of them showed two people falling in love, captured without their knowledge or consent. Why? Elias's voice was barely controlled fury. Because someone needed to protect you from making a terrible mistake. Protect me from what? Bethany's composure cracked slightly. From her. From this fantasy that you can just move on and pretend Luna and Arya never existed. The words hit the room like a bomb. Imani felt her chest tighten as the full scope of Bethany's obsession became clear. Bethany, Elias said carefully, Luna and Arya have been gone for 4 years. They're not coming back, but their memory should be sacred. You promised Luna you'd love her forever. You promised Arya you'd always be her daddy. And now you're throwing all of that away for... She looked at Imani with undisguised contempt. For someone you barely know. I'm not throwing anything away. Aren't you? Bethany pulled out her phone and showed them a photo. Elias and Imani in the hidden room surrounded by his drawings. You brought her into the space where you keep their memory. You drew her picture next to theirs. How is that not betrayal? Imani stood up, her anger finally overriding her shock. You don't get to decide what betrayal looks like for him. Don't I? I was Luna's best friend. I was Arya's godmother. I loved them too, and I watched this man fall apart when they died. I held him while he cried. I made sure he ate. I kept his business running when he couldn't function. I earned the right to protect what they built together. The possessiveness in her voice made everything click into place for Elias. You're in love with me. Bethany's face flushed red. I've always been in love with you. But Luna was my friend, so I stepped aside. I watched you be happy with her, watched you build a family, and I accepted that I would only ever be on the periphery of your life. But when they died, you thought you'd have your chance. I thought you'd eventually see that I was the one who never left. The one who understood your pain because I was grieving them too. The one who could love you without trying to replace what you lost. Elias stared at her with something like pity. Bethany, I never gave you any indication that I felt that way about you. Because you were too broken to see it. But you were healing slowly, and I thought someday... She gestured helplessly. Then she showed up and ruined everything. Imani felt a surge of something between anger and sympathy. I didn't ruin anything. I helped him remember that he's still alive. You made him forget what he owes to the dead. I made him realize that living isn't a betrayal of the dead. Imani's voice rose. That Luna and Arya would want him to be happy, not trapped in a museum of grief. You don't know what they would want. You never knew them. But I know him. Imani turned to face Elias. And I know that the man who draws with such love, who grieves with such depth, who cares with such intensity, That man is capable of honoring his past while building a future. Luna and Arya didn't love a man who would choose death over life. They loved someone who would choose love even when it scared him. Bethany pulled out another envelope, this one thicker. It doesn't matter what pretty speeches you make. What matters is that I have enough evidence here to destroy both of your careers. Inappropriate workplace relationships, abuse of power, breach of professional conduct. Do it. Elias's voice cut through her threats like a blade. Both women stared at him. I said do it. Release your photos, file your complaints, destroy my career if that's what you think you need to do. He stood up, and for the first time since Imani had known him, he looked completely unafraid. Because I won't let fear make my choices anymore. Elias, Bethany started. No. You want to know what Luna and Arya would think? They'd think I wasted 4 years being afraid to live. They'd be heartbroken that I let grief turn me into someone who was afraid of joy, afraid of connection, afraid of love. He looked at Imani. They'd be grateful that someone finally cared enough to remind me who I used to be. Bethany's face crumpled. I loved them too, and I loved you, and I couldn't bear watching you forget them. I'm not forgetting them, Elias said gently. I'm learning that loving them doesn't mean I have to stop loving altogether. He walked to Imani and took her hands. I love you, he said, loud enough for Bethany to hear, clear enough that there could be no doubt. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you see beauty in broken things. I love how you made me remember that grief and joy aren't mutually exclusive. And I love that you never asked me to choose between my past and my future. You just showed me I could have both. Imani felt tears streaming down her face. I love you too, all of you, including the parts that still belong to them. Bethany watched this exchange with the expression of someone watching a dream die in real time. Finally, she picked up her envelopes. I won't use these, she said quietly, but I can't work here anymore. I can't watch you be happy with someone else. I understand, Elias said. And Bethany, thank you for everything you did when I couldn't do it myself. Luna and Arya were lucky to have you love them. After she left, Elias and Imani stood in the silence of his office, holding each other while the Chicago skyline painted everything in golden afternoon light. Are you okay? Imani asked. I'm better than okay. I'm free. He pulled back to look at her. I choose you, Imani. I choose us. I choose the possibility that love can be bigger than loss, even if it's complicated, even if people don't understand. Especially then, he kissed her forehead, because the best things in life are worth fighting for. As they stood together in the office where they'd found each other, surrounded by the city that had witnessed their unlikely love story, both of them knew that this was only the beginning, not just of their relationship, but of a life built on the radical belief that healing was possible, that love could expand rather than replace, and that sometimes the greatest honor we can give to those we've lost is to live fully in their memory. 1 year later, some endings are really beginnings in disguise. The October morning sun streamed through the windows of what had once been Elias's hidden art room, now transformed into something entirely new, a space where past and future coexisted in perfect harmony. Imani stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, watching her husband add the final touches to his latest drawing. The word still felt surreal, even 6 months after their quiet wedding ceremony in Mrs. Kingsley's garden, with Vivian and Robert Vaughan as witnesses, and Mrs. Kingsley officiating with the authority vested in her by an online ordination and sheer force of personality. Almost finished? She asked, settling into the window seat they'd installed specifically for moments like this. Elias looked up from his easel, charcoal smudged on his fingers, and that soft smile she'd grown to love playing at the corners of his mouth. Just a few more details. The drawing was part of a series he'd been working on, scenes from their life together. This one captured last Friday afternoon at the cemetery, where their weekly visits had become less about grief and more about gratitude. In the drawing, Imani knelt beside Luna and Arya's shared headstone, carefully arranging the white roses, while Elias sat nearby, sketching her profile in his ever-present notebook. Mrs. Kingsley called, Imani said. She wants to know if we're still coming to Sunday dinner. Apparently, she's making her famous pot roast, and she's convinced you need more meat on your bones. We'll be there. Elias set down his charcoal and moved to sit beside her. How was your morning with Vivian? Productive. She's excited about the foundation launch. Says your father is already planning a speech that will make everyone cry. Imani leaned against his shoulder. She also asked if we'd thought any more about her suggestion. The suggestion had come 3 months ago, delivered with Vivian's characteristic blend of subtlety and determination. Had they considered that Luna and Arya's love story didn't have to end with their deaths, that perhaps the foundation they were creating in their memory could include a scholarship program for young artists, children who dreamed of making beautiful things but lacked the resources to pursue their passion. I've been thinking about it constantly, Elias admitted. But I wanted to make sure we were doing it for the right reasons. Which are? Because Arya would have loved the idea of helping other kids discover art, and because Luna always said that love multiplied when it was shared, not divided when it was given away. Imani turned to study his face. So we're doing it? We're doing it. He kissed the top of her head. The Arya-Luna Foundation for Young Artists. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Delilah, who had taken over as Elias's assistant after Bethany's departure. Emergency at the office. The Morrison project model just arrived, and it's gorgeous. Elias needs to see this. Duty calls, Imani said, showing him the message. It can wait. Elias pulled her closer. This is more important. What is? This moment. Right here. You, me, the light coming through the windows. The fact that I can hold you without being afraid of losing you. He gestured to the room around them. Do you know what this space represents now? Imani looked around the studio, taking in the drawings that chronicled not just his grief but his healing. Luna and Arya's portraits still held places of honor on the far wall, but they were surrounded now by scenes of a life being rebuilt. Elias and Imani's first coffee together, Mrs. Kingsley laughing in her hospital bed, Vivienne crying at their wedding. Quiet moments of domestic happiness that proved love could bloom again without diminishing what came before. What does it represent? Proof that the heart has infinite capacity, that loving you doesn't make me love them less. It makes me love everything more. Through the window, Chicago stretched out before them, a city full of possibilities and new beginnings. Somewhere in that urban landscape, other people were learning to love again after loss, finding the courage to believe that happiness wasn't a betrayal of sorrow, but its ultimate transformation. Do you ever wonder what they'd think? Imani asked softly. About us? About this life we're building? Elias was quiet for a moment, considering. I think Luna would tease me about how long it took me to ask you to marry me. And I think Arya would demand to know why we don't have a dog yet. Just a dog? Well, she always wanted a little brother or sister, but she was 6. I think she would have settled for a golden retriever. Imani laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. Maybe we should get a dog. Maybe we should get a lot of things. A house with a bigger garden so Mrs. Kingsley can teach us about roses. Studio space where you can write. Yes, I know about the novel you've been secretly working on. A nursery eventually when we're ready. And if we have children, then they'll grow up knowing about the aunt and sister they never met, but who loved them before they were even born. They'll learn that love doesn't end with death. It just changes form. A year ago, Imani would never have imagined sitting in a room filled with portraits of her husband's deceased family, planning a future that honored both past and present. But grief, she'd learned, wasn't the opposite of love. It was love with nowhere to go. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone willing to help you redirect that love toward new possibilities. I love you, she said, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd survived to get to this moment. I love you too, all of you. Even the parts that belong to the future we're going to build together. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of 8 million people, pursuing their own dreams, fighting their own battles, learning their own lessons about the complicated arithmetic of the human heart. But inside their sanctuary of art and memory, 2 people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss held each other close and planned a future that would honor where they'd been while embracing where they were going. Because that's what love does. It expands to fill whatever space it's given, creating room for both memory and hope, both gratitude and anticipation. And sometimes, if you're very brave and very lucky, it creates something beautiful enough to last forever. In the end, Elias and Imani learned that the greatest tribute to those we've lost isn't to stop living. It's to live so fully, so completely, so openly, that our joy becomes a testament to the love that made us who we are. And in that living, in that loving, in that choosing hope over fear, we discover that some stories don't end. They just begin again, in different voices, with different faces, but with the same eternal truth. Love is the only thing that grows when it's shared. What would you want someone you love to do if you were no longer here to share their life? Would you want them to stay frozen in grief, or would you want them to love again, fully and fearlessly? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.